The Mishnah states on Lamed Zayin Amud Beis of the Mishnah, "Heichad hoya me'ananin." Where did they? Which part of the Hallel did they do the waving? The Gemara is going to ask, who mentioned anything about waving? You know, you're opening up with a question, where did they wave? As if you're telling me, as if you're taking it for granted that you're supposed to wave. So, so that's what the Gemara is going to jump on. Where did you tell me anything about waving? That you're asking me the question, where did they wave? So that's going to be the Gemara's question. But at this point, the Mishnah is asking the question, where did they do the waving? Right? So the Gemara Mishnah states, "V'hodol Hashem tchila v'sof." They did the waving in Hodol Hashem Kitov, Hilo Lam Chasto. That's where they did the waving, and Tchila V'sof. They did it in the beginning. We open up that's one chapter. Hodol Hashem Kitov Hilo Lam Chasto. Middle of the Hallel. You get up to Hodol Hashem Kitov Kilam Chasto. Somebody said Kilam Chasto. So at that first Hodol Hashem Kitov Kilam Chasto, you wave, and also the end of that, there's another later on at the end of the Hallel. The end of the Hallel ends with Hodol Hashem Kitov Kilam Chasto. Good morning, Adam. If you want to mention to the people that we're on. The end of the Hallel also ends with Hodol Hashem Kitov. I'm going to get a sitter. That's the end of the Hallel. Really, it's interesting that the Hallel that we state, the Hallel that we say a bracha on the Hallel, and it's straight chapters in Tehillim. The Hallel. Good morning, Jaime.
Morning, Rabbi.
The Hallel, we are on 37b in the Mishnah. The Hallel that we say on the holiday of Sukkot, and we say Hallel on Pesach, we say on different holidays, on Hanukkah, it begins with the chapter Kuf Yud Gimel 113 of Tehillim, and it goes straight. And then when you get to Hodol Hashem Kitov Kilam Chasto, that is the beginning of chapter 118. And if you look at it, Tehillim, chapter 118 begins with Hodol Hashem Kitov Kilam Chasto, and chapter 118 ends with Hodol Hashem Kitov Kilam Chasto. So that chapter that begins with Hodol Hashem Kitov Kilam Chasto, you're supposed to wave at Hodol Hashem Kitov Kilam Chasto. Now, if you see Hodol Hashem Kitov is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 7 words in Hodol Hashem Kitov Kilam Chasto. Correct, Ralph? There's 7 words in Hodol Hashem, right, Jaime? And we wave. We're going to be waving in 6 directions. So we're going to be waving at 6 of the 7 words of Hodol Hashem. There's one word in Hodol Hashem that we do not wave. Which word do we wave? We don't wave when we mention Hashem's name. When we mention Hashem's name, we don't wave. And in the Yalkut Yosef, he says, because when you're mentioning God's name, it obviously requires extra kavanah, extra focus. And if you're going to be doing multitasking, if you're going to be saying Hashem's name and at the same time moving things around, moving the lulav around, that's going to might be a possible distraction on focusing on the mentioning of Hashem's name, which I think is a beautiful idea. That when you mention Hashem's name, you shouldn't be doing other things. That even if you're doing something which is actually a mitzvah, you're doing a mitzvah, but there's a mitzvah to wave the lulav. There's a mitzvah to say a bracha, and not to do both things at the same. And now, even though we're going to wave when we're saying Hodol Hashem, Ki Tov Ki Lom Chasdo, but we're not going to wave during the time that we're saying Hashem's name in the Hodol Hashem. Good morning, Mark.
Rabbi.
Okay, we just started.
Morning, Amy.
The Mishnah on Lamed Zayin base begins. How did they wave the lulav? So the Mishnah states you wave the lulav Hodol Hashem tchila ubesof. The Mishnah says you wave the lulav in the beginning. You wave it throughout the sentence of Hodol Hashem Kitov Kilom Chasto. You wave it. We said you wave it every word another direction, except when you say Hashem's name. You don't wave the lulav. And the Mishnah continues, and he says, "V'ana Hashem Hoshiana." Also, we wave the lulav at Ana Hashem Hoshiana. That's another, and that's exactly what we do. We wave the lulav in Hodol Hashem Kitov Kilom Chasto, and we also wave the lulav in Ana Hashem Hoshiana. So the way in the Yalkut Yosef, he says the following. He says every person, this is for the Sfardim, every person waves 4 times in the Hallel. There's 4 places where you wave. You wave in the first Hodul Hashem Kitov Kilam Chasto. You wave the lulav 1 time. And in the Ana Hashem Hoshiana, you wave the lulav twice, because you say Ana Hashem Hoshiana twice, and you're supposed to wave the lulav each time you say Ana Hashem Hoshiana, and he says you wave it once in the Hodu, the last Hodu, the Hodu at the end, which ends the Hallel. The last Hodu, you wave it once. What'd you say?
What do you mean once? I don't know.
What do I mean? What do I mean once? It means, let's say, even if you say there's some places that they say Hodul Hashem at the end of the Hallel, they say Hodul Hashem Kitov Kilam Chazdo, Hodul Hashem Kitov Kilam Chazdo, like here in the Siddur, in the Sephardi Siddur. There are some communities that they see in the Tehillim itself. The Tehillim itself, it has Hodul Hashem Kitov Kilam Chazdo. It's written once in the way it's written in the Tehillim itself. You know, when we're saying the Hallel, we're saying the Hallel is the makeup from the Tehillim. And we're going to see the Tehillim itself does not have Hodol Hashem Kitov Kilam Chasto double. Similarly, it doesn't have Ana Hashem Hoshiana, Ana Hashem Hoshiana, Ana Hashem Hoshiana. Just says Ana Hashem Hoshiana once. And Ana Hashem Hatzlichana, it also only says it once. So, but even if you have a place, which is the custom, that we repeat, we say Hodol Hashem Kitov Kilam Chasto twice, right? How do we? We say Hodol Hashem Kitov Kilam Chasto. The end of the Hallel, the last words of the Hallel, before you say the blessing, that the blessing that concludes the Hallel on the holiday is Yehalucha Hashem Elokeinu Kol Ma'asecha, which ends Baruch Atah Hashem Melech Molo Batishbachot, which we only say. You only say that when you say the complete Hallel. On Rosh Chodesh, you don't say Yehalucha Hashem Elokeinu Kol Ma'asecha. On Rosh Chodesh, you don't open up the Hallel with a bracha for the Sfardim, because the recital of Hallel on Rosh Chodesh is a minhag, and since it's not a rabbinic obligation, it was a minhag, didn't have that level of rabbinic enactment. Therefore, there's no bracha on the Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. Right. However, on a holiday, when you say the whole Hallel, then you say a bracha. The bracha begins the Hallel begins with the bracha and ends with the bracha. It opens up bracha to Hashem Elokeinu Melech Olam, Asher Kiddushanu Mitzvotav V'Tzivonu Ligmor et Hallel. That's the bracha that precedes the Hallel. That's the bracha you say before you say the Hallel, and then there's a bracha that ends the Hallel, and that bracha begins with Yehalucha Hashem Elokeinu Kol Ma'asecha and concludes bracha to Hashem Melech Molol V'Tishbachot Amen. But the last words of the Hallel, Ahodol Hashem Ki Tov Ki L'Olam Chasto. Morning, and even in the custom that we repeat the words Hodol Hashem Ki Tov Ki L'Olam Chasto, but it would seem that in the first Hodol Hashem Ki Tov Ki L'Olam Chasto, when you repeat the Hodol Hashem Ki Tov Ki L'Olam Chasto, even though you're reciting Hodol Hashem Ki Tov Ki L'Olam Chasto twice, but only the first time you say the Hodol Hashem Ki Tov Ki L'Olam Chasto, you would wave the lulav. So those are the 4 times that you would go ahead and wave the lulav. And again, you would wave it in the first time you say Hodol Hashem Ki Tov Ki L'Olam Chasto. And you would wave it in Ana Hashem Hoshiana twice. And we have to look, it says the last Hodu. The last Hodu, I wonder if they maybe they, I would have to double check. Maybe they mean when you say Tiban Ashkenazim, we do by both Hodu Hashem Ki Tov Ki L'Olam Chasto, we wave the lulav. But he says
I believe we also do on every Hodu. How many times they say Hodu?
Okay, so maybe they have to go see if it's bringing a different custom here. That the last.
How many times do we say Hodu?
So you say Hodu, you say it in when you open, you say Hodu Hashem Ki Tov Ki L'Olam Chasto. You say it. You only have one Hodu in the begin. The first time you say it, you have it once. You have one Hodu, and then you have 2 Hodus at the end of the Hallel. And he says,
I believe we say it in all. We shake the lulav in all of them.
So you're saying in all the 3 Hodul Hashem Ki Tov. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the minhag with the on Sukkot?
I'm 90% sure. Does anyone else remember?
What?
Does anyone else remember? Jaime, do you remember?
The last one of the last.
Mark, call into headquarters. Let's see what they say.
Okay. Okay. Okay, we're gonna go look more into that. Okay. So now. So Beis Hillel.
Jaime or no?
What?
Jaime, do you remember or no?
I don't know the answer. I like my joke. Call into headquarters.
Okay.
Yes, I like your joke too.
Okay, we'll look into it a little more. Because the way he writes it, it's the last Hodu. The last Hodu, which would sound like if you double it at the end, like we do, the last Hodu, the last Hodu that you would wave it. But again, we'll look more into it. We'll look a little more into it. But again, the Mishnah states you do it in Hodu. If you look at the language at the Mishnah, it's Hodu Lashem Tchila the Sof. The Hodu in the beginning and the Hodu at the end, right? But it's not clear, right? It's not so clear what. So which sound like the first Hodu that we say and the last Hodu that you say, that's where you even if you double it, it's the last Hodu that you would say. That's what it sounds like from over here. Also, Uva'ana Hashem Hoshiana. And also, when you say Ana Hashem Hoshiana, which is repeated twice. So in both places over there, you wave the lulav in Ana Hashem Hoshiana. Okay. Divrei Beit Hillel. Beis Shammai Omrim. Beis Shammai says Also, ba'ana Hashem, af ba'ana Hashem hatzlichana. You also do it, ba'ana Hashem hatzlichana. That is not the custom. We don't wave it in ana Hashem hatzlichana. But Beit Shammai says you also should wave it in ana Hashem hatzlichana. Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, Sofer hayiti Rabbi Gamliel of Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Akiva was known to observing great rabbis. Maybe that's why he became such a great rabbi himself. And watching how great rabbis did and acted in life to see what the halacha is, how you act in life. So Rabbi Akiva says, I was watching Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua. And it's interesting because these were really his colleagues. Maybe they were like the leading rabbis. You know, it seemed that Rabbi Gamliel was like the Nasi, he was the prince. Rabbi Yeshua was like second to him, so to speak. And Rabbi Akiva was like third, I would say. And Rabbi Akiva, he said, I was watching Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua, Shekol ha'am hayemenanin es lulavehem. Everybody was shaking their lulav, not only by Hodul Hashem Kitov, and not only by Ana Hashem Mashiach, they also waved the lulav and Ana Hashem Hatzlichana. Everybody was waving Ana Hashem Hatzlichana, but the leading rabbis, they did not do that. But they vehem lo nanu ela be'ana Hashem Mashiach. They only wave by Ana Hashem Mashiach and certainly by Hodul Hashem Kitov Gilam Hasto, but they did not wave in Ana Hashem Maslichana. Ralph, is that clear? They didn't wave in Ana Hashem Maslichana, which is the opinion of Beit Hillel. They were not strict to wave by Ana Hashem Hatzlichana. Okay. Now the Gemara asks a very obvious question. The Gemara says, Nanua mandikashmei. Who mentioned Nanua and who mentioned waving? You know, the Mishnah opens up, you know, it's a very similar question in the Masechet Brachot, the first Masechta, the first tractate in the Gemara, where the Mishnah starts, Me'ematai koren Shema ba'arvis. So you have to first tell me there's a mitzvah of Shema before you ask me the question of when do you read the Shema. First introduce the mitzvah of Shema and then ask me a detailed question. Same thing the Gemara is asking the question of here. What do you mean when? Where do you wave? First you got to tell me you got to wave. Talk to me. Tell me about waving. Then you can start asking me the question of where do you wave? That's the Gemara's question. Who mentioned waving? Why is it so obvious to the Mishnah that there's a mitzvah to wave? And then, as a result of that, you're asking me a question, where do you wave? First, tell me this. Where did you introduce to me the mitzvah of waving? The Gemara says, Hatam Kai. The Tana of this Mishnah is really a continuation of our one of the recent Mishnayot, that we were learning back on 29b. What did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah stated that kolulav sheyesh ba shlosha tvachim. A lulav has to have, it should have a spine. The spine of the lulav should be at least 3 tvachim. Plus, after the spine has 3 tvachim, it should have, let's say, at least a tefach of space for the leaves of the lulav. Because the lulav has to be a minimum size of 4 tvachim, as we said. That siman that ravos are like 3 tvachim, around 11 inches, let's say. And the lulav should be most probably about 15 or so inches, which the lulav should have 3 tvachim, but the spine should be at least 11 inches, plus space, at least a tefach, few inches for going ahead and be 3.5 inches to wave, for the leaves to wave. So it says a lulav sheish b'shlos tefachim kedei lenanei bo. If it has proper measurement that it should be able to wave, because the lulav needs a certain size to have proper measurement to be able to fulfill the mitzvah of waving properly, kosher. That lulav is kosher. And it introduced to us the idea that there's a mitzvah to wave. It talks about a lulav having the proper size, that the leaves should be above the hadassim and the aragot and be able to do proper waving. So therefore, on that, now that you already introduced to us, there is a mitzvah called waving, and we're going to see what's the waving all about. I know in sports, there's something called waving, and the fans in the audience, there's something called a waving, right? They make a wave, right? So when you see a wave in sports, you're supposed to be thinking about the lulav, right? That's what you're supposed to be thinking about. How do you do the wave, the proper waving of the lulav? So therefore, come on. Therefore, our mission says, okay, where do you do it? Okay, there's a mitzvah to wave. You introduce the mitzvah to wave. How do you do it, and how do you do it right? Okay, we're now on 37b. In the art scroll, we're now on 37b3. Okay, 37b3. Tanan Hatam on the bottom left first column. Tanan Hatam. We learned over there in the Mishnah and Menachot regarding certain offerings need in the midst of waving certain offerings, korbanot. Certain animals have to be waved. Certain breads have to be waved. There's a Mishnah, meaning it's not only this idea of lulav, that we wave the lulav, is not the only thing that's ever waved. Maybe, it's one of the few things that we see. We don't have the Beit HaMikdash today, but in the Beit HaMikdash there was waving. We wave the lulav today. I'm saying, but at the time of the Beit HaMikdash, they did other things. There were things in the Beit HaMikdash, other offerings actually that they had to wave. On the holiday of Shavuot, there were two breads that were made from wheat that were brought on the holiday, and they would bring with the bread certain offerings. They would bring a sin offering, an ola offering, and then they would bring also a peace offering. They would bring kvasim, sheep. Now, the two breads were chametz. Not too easy to weigh a sheep, but let's say a young sheep is not so. Maybe the Kohanim, they worked out a little bit. Maybe they were in good shape. That's right. So we're going to see they were able to wave the sheep, the young sheep. So the two breads were chametz, and the two breads, no part of the bread went on the altar because it was chametz, but they needed to be waved. The bread had to be waved together with these sheep. Now, so what does it say over here? So how did you do it? Keitzahu said, how did you go ahead and do the waving? Keitzahu said, the Kohen would place the two breads. Morning. He placed the two breads on top of the sheep when the sheep were alive, and he would go ahead and he would place his hands underneath. He would go ahead and wave them this way, and he waved them. Thank you very much. And he would wave them towards him. He would wave them outwardly, and then he would go ahead and wave them outwardly and bring it back. Umevi. And that's what he would do to all four directions. He would wave this way, and he would wave that way, let's say. Like this, we'll see exactly the order, how we do the waving. But he waved to the four directions, straight ahead, east, west, north, and south. And then, right, you start south, correct. He waved it in the four directions. And then, afterwards, he brought them upwards, and then he was a moment and downwards. So all the six directions. 4 directions and plus up and down. Shenema, as the pasuk says, Asher hunaf v'asher huram. As the pasuk says, Asher hunaf and huram, and those two languages are represent. Hunaf is moving it direction straight ahead and back, or to the side and back, and huram is to lift up. It's going up, and then going down. So that was that is the limud for all six directions. Okay, so that's how it was done over there. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan says, Molech umevi. When you go ahead, what's the reason why we go ahead? Rabbi Yochanan is coming to explain what is the reason for these. Why are we waving in all the different directions, right? So comes Rabbi Yochanan. So after we just introduced to us that we found by the korbanot, that the korbanot, it's done, this is the way it was done by the korbanot, very similar to the lulav. The lulav, we wave the lulav in all 6 directions. So too, the korbanot, these offerings that required tzuva, that required the waving, they were also done in all 6 directions. Rabbi Yochanan says, Molichu mevi, the point of moving the lulav in the different directions is, what's the reason for that? Is lemi shehaba ruchot shalom. We're coming to emphasize that we're doing this mitzvah. What's the point why we're doing the mitzvah? We're recognizing that there's a Hashem, that there's a God that rules all the different ruchot, all the different directions of the world are ruled by Hashem, and that's why we're emphasizing our recognition when we're doing this mitzvah. That's going to be the next opinion. But the first opinion is saying that is showing that the mitzvah of lulav that we're doing this mitzvah of lulav, we're recognizing that Hashem is the ruler of the world, and we're doing it in His honor. That's what we're recognizing, that we recognize His power, His dominion. Umala umorid. We're also recognizing the heavens and the earth. We're recognizing that all the directions of the world, all the winds of the world are controlled by Hashem. So it's an act of emunah. So really it's an act of emunah. It's an illustration of our belief in Hashem running this world, the whole world. So that's the idea about the lulav, of why we do these nanuim. Now, b'marava, and obviously, let's say we understand by the korbanot, it's going to be a great merit for you when you recognize that Hashem rules the whole world and all the different directions of the world, that the heavens and the earth. That will be a great merit for the Jewish people when you illustrate that. Obviously, it's interesting why specifically this mitzvah of lulav did they say that you should go ahead and do these nanuim to show the emunah in the world, that Hashem is the control of everything. Perhaps it's the idea. Good morning. That we're judged on water, we're judged on parnasah. So maybe that's connected why they wanted us to have that merit of recognizing that who's the one who brings you the parnasah. Maybe to recognize that idea. But it's interesting that specifically in this mitzvah we don't have a mitzvah by matzah to wave the matzah. There's no mitzvah to wave the matzah. Good morning, good to see you, David. But they felt that we should institute, the Rabbanan instituted this mitzvah of waving the lulav. In Eretz Yisrael, matnu hachi. They said the following, which Mark was saying. What's the point? Why are we waving the lulav? What is the message of the lulav? He says, the reason why you go ahead and you wave the lulav is that any bad winds that might come from the four corners of the world, from the south, any southern wind, northern wind, eastern wind, any of the winds that morning that might be bad, might bring destruction. So we want any of those winds to be withheld, to be held back. And that's what we're waving to those directions, indicating that it's like an act that's like a prayer, that we're like praying to Hashem. Sometimes you could pray by speaking, and sometimes your act is there's a symbol of what you're doing by waving in those directions. Like when you point to something, when a person points to above, right? You're not saying anything, but you're recognizing the one above. So here we're going by pointing in that direction. We're asking and we're pointing at that, waving in that direction, that anything that's bad that could come from those winds from those directions of the world should be held back from us. We're pushing it away. Umala umorid. And we go in the direction of up and down. Not only we wave to the four directions, we wave up. We up and down is kedei la'atzot tloim ra'im. There's certain dew, tal, that comes from above and lower down, and we want that dew should also, any bad dew, when you have crops, right? Like we have that the mun had a cover of dew, of tal. That's, by the way, one of the reasons why we cover the bread on Shabbat, is because the mun was covered with dew on top. That's one of the reasons. So dew is one of those things that Hashem, that comes from heaven, that comes down onto the crops. And obviously a certain dew that's positive, and a certain dew that's not healthy for the crops, for the food. And therefore we're praying, in a certain sense, the act of when you're pointing above and below where the dew comes from, that it should only be, there should not be any bad dew. So that's if you look at 32, they quote from the Meiri, that the Meiri says that the waving demonstrates our emunah, our faith, that in the merit of keeping his Torah, Hashem will spare us from difficult times, from bad winds, from bad dews. That's a little bit of what the waving is symbolic. It's in a certain sense that we're asking for that protection. Amar Rav Yossi bar Oven Ritem Rav Yossi bar Zvilus. So when you're waving the lulav, so it's a demonstration of emunah. Whether it's the demonstration of emunah that the four directions and the up and down, that God controls everything, and you're showing you're recognizing that, or whether it's because you're asking specifically from those areas of the world, from up and down and from the four directions, nothing bad, no bad winds and no bad dew should come to the Jewish people. We see a very, by the way, so we see there's much more meaning to the waving. It's either a great request for protection, or it's just an indication of great emunah, which is also both of them you'll have great benefit from it. So Zoto Meret, and also maybe the fact that this is what they did by a korban, to recognize that when they brought certain offerings, they actually had a wave. So we are connecting this mitzvah of lulav. They wave the lamb in all directions, 6 directions. So that's the language of the, when it says, it says, the mainif or moli or mevi or malam morid. It says, it would seem from the language of the Gemara, they did 6 directions by the korban. So it shows you that the fact that the rabbi instituted the mitzvah of waving the lulav, which is something which the precedent of waving was found on a korban, shows you the importance of the lulav, that the lulav should have an aspect of the lulav that mirrors a korban, that mirrors an offering. And part of offering served as a kapara, offering served as an atonement. So obviously, if you have doing the lulav will also act as a. You see, look what the Gemara says. It comes the Gemara and says, "Zosomeret." Now on 38a, sheyarei mitzvah, a part of a mitzvah, which is not the main part of a mitzvah. There are certain parts of a mitzvah that if you don't do it, you don't get credit for the mitzvah. If you don't sprinkle the blood when you slaughter the animal, you don't sprinkle the blood on the altar, you don't get atonement. But then there are certain things, the waving, even if you don't do the waving of the korban, like we spoke about the sheep that was waved together with the breads that were on top of the sheep, if you don't wave it, you still get credit for the korban, even if you missed that point. So even a part which is a shiuri mitzvah, a part of a mitzvah which is not a integral part of the mitzvah, like if you don't have a dasim, you don't get the mitzvah of lulav, right? There's certain things that you lose out, you don't get it. So you have the korban, the offering, the waving of the offering, even though it's a biblical mitzvah to wave the offering, you still get credit for the mitzvah. For instance, tzitzit, there's the mitzvah of techelet. You still get, if you don't have techelet, you don't have that blue string, you still get credit for the mitzvah of tzitzit. It's not integral to the point that you don't get the credit for the mitzvah of tzitzit. But nevertheless, the leftover of the mitzvah, so to speak, not the main part of the mitzvah, ma'akvin et haporaniyot. We see that it's so powerful that it can hold back punishment. Why? Shaharei tnufa. Tnufa, the waving. Good morning, Sally. The waving is shiyarei mitzvahi. The waving is something which is not an integral part of the offering. The integral part of the offering is many other parts, not the waving. You miss the waving, you still get atonement, and yet it's makvin. It holds back perennial. It still holds back because we just said that by doing the waving, what does it do? It prevents the bad winds from coming. The waving of the korban will prevent the bad dew to come down. So we see, you shouldn't make light of a part of a mitzvah which is not integral to the mitzvah. But good morning, because even that part has a power to hold back punishment. So he's trying to show you the power, the importance of all parts of a mitzvah, even a part of a mitzvah which is not integral for you to get atonement, yet it still has tremendous strength of accomplishment. Because it's Yeri Mitzri, and yet Utseret Ruchot Utfloim Rahim. Even something which is not an integral part, so maybe it's also a lesson in life. Sometimes there are certain details of a mitzvah, which, if you don't do it in that fashion, for instance, beautifying a mitzvah, right? You're having a nice talit, nice mezuzah. Even if it's not the nicest, even if it's a plain talit, a plain mezuzah, a plain whatever, you still get credit for the mitzvah, even if you didn't do that detail, right? You still get, a guy has a dirty talit. It's not nice, it's dirty. He still gets credit for the mitzvah, but nevertheless, you need to realize, look at a detail of a mitzvah, which is not, so to speak, a make or break for the mitzvah, but nevertheless, look at how powerful it is that it could go ahead and create. Here it's a question of preventing punishment. So we don't know anytime there's a detail of a mitzvah to be careful to recognize you don't know the power of that detail, even if it's not an integral part of the mitzvah. So let's be focused on all details of a mitzvah that we need to do. It doesn't seem that it's referring to evil eye. It seems like it's referring to for natural things that will harm. I mean, so far it seems like just a bad wind could usually hurt a crop, and the dew will affect. It sounds like more affecting your hurting your livelihood. That's what it seems that this is going to go ahead and it could be it's also serving that as well, but the focus here of the Gemara is about bad dew and bad winds, which seems to be material blessing for the person, which also makes a lot of sense because we said we were judged on rain, and rain has to do with the crops, and you want to and the lulav, and these are things that grow by they need water. These are things that we want to have great crops, so therefore most probably want to ward off any negativity that could really hurt our crops. Have a great day, everybody. All the best.
You told me.
Fourth grade, they won a World Series. I'm done being about that.
I'm going to close it off 1 second. Have a great day, Jaime.